Morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our Tuesday live stream to discuss digital transformation related topics. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And today's topic that we're going to cover is called Best Practices in Supply Chain Automation and Digital Transformation. It's admittedly a very broad topic. There's a lot of different directions we could go in this conversation. We're gonna take a pass at it here and see if we can sort of do a flyover view here of what some of those best practices in supply chain automation and digital transformation are. I'll introduce our guest in just a moment, who's joining us to unpack this exciting and broad strategic topic here in just a moment. But before I do, a couple of quick notes about this live stream. First of all, this is a live stream we do every Tuesday, same time, same place. We stream to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And this live interview becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which gets released every Wednesday. And the episode that features this discussion will be released a week from tomorrow, so a week from Wednesday. You can find this polished, complete episode on Transformation Ground Control. And you can find that streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. Secondly, I have a list of questions that I'm going to start with to get the conversation going on this topic of supply chain automation and digital transformation. But I encourage the audience to ask questions as well. That's actually the fun part of this whole conversation. So any questions you have along the way for my guest and I, please drop them in the chat wherever you're listening or watching here today. We are keeping an eye here on all the streams, and we can see all the chats as they're already starting here in front of us too. So please drop in the chat any questions you have. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat where you're joining from today. I'd love to see where the audience is here today. What city and country are you in? That's always fun to see where the global digital transformation community that we are part of, that's always fun to see where everyone's joining from today. So drop that in chat. We'd love to see where you're from here today. And as I mentioned, today's topic is best practices in supply chain automation and digital transformation. And joining me today is Dominic Lynn, who's the vice president of the Third Stage Consulting office in Europe, more specifically Maidenhead, UK, just outside of London. Dominic, thank you for being here today.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes,
appreciate to see how the conversation goes.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here late in the day, your time. And what better person to discuss this topic of supply chain automation than you and digital transformation? I know this is something that is near and dear to your heart, and something you have a deep background in. But before we get into some of these questions I've got for you about supply chain automation and digital transformation, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing here in the whole world of supply chain and digital transformation.
Yeah, sure. So, my background goes back, I guess 30 odd years. And I actually started off in working for a company that supplied manufacturing solutions and maintenance management systems, asset management, and things like that. Back in the late 80s now, showing my age. So it was really around forward finance, scheduling, manufacturing, where it's really just in time, pretty much on the basis of that. There's a system called Op21, which was a system that was used by really big companies, but they were a really small company. So we actually brought it into the 21st century by putting it on Oracle, put it on an Oracle relational database. So all these files and networks and routings that we had were now in a relational database. So that was my first exposure to databases, but based around manufacturing and supply chain. So it's kind of been in my blood for quite a while now. Over 30 years. Sounds terrible when you say it like that.
Yeah. Well, we want to take advantage of your experience. I won't say your age. We'll talk about your experience and your maturity as a consultant in this field. We'll take advantage of here today by digging into some of this. But what drew you in? Like, why did you get into this field? Why did you decide to get into digital transformation, and more specifically, some supply chain focus that you've had over the years?
Yeah, I suppose it's that whole area where, finance is always there. I kind of did a lot of finance and computing at college and university. And I think when you visit a plant, so I visit some refineries or warehouses or manufacturing plants, and it's always that sort of interest where you can see a little bit more about what's going on. So finance is finance, excellent. But when you start to look at the whole operation, from warehousing, demand planning right through to outbound, it's just a bit more interesting. So it always sort of fascinated me. Some of these companies that had these big operations, and you can suddenly see something that was on the screen, a name of a machine, and then you see the machine, you think, okay, it all makes sense. So I always found it a little bit more real. I think that's probably what pulled me in.
Interesting. Yeah, it is. I agree with you, by the way, and I share the same opinion about supply chain management. Just the complexity of it is challenging and fun, and there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, which is part of what we'll talk about here today, as far as ways that technology and process improvements can help supply chain management. And that makes it a lot of fun for certain. So before we jump into some of these questions I have, I'm hoping you can help us settle a debate that we had last week in last week's episode of the podcast. Doesn't have a lot to do with supply chain management or digital transformation, but I'll ask it anyway. And that question that came up in last week's episode was choosing between the Beatles or Elvis. Who is more influential? And I ask you that obviously because I think you may have a bias. I don't know, just based on the fact that you're from the UK. But what's your knee-jerk reaction to that? Beatles or Elvis?
Well, I would go Beatles, but that's probably is it just because I'm UK? I don't think so. My love of music is broad, so I think they were such an influential and magical band. I used to live near Abbey Road. I think I mentioned this before. So I used to have a jogging route that took me past Abbey Road, and it's just this sort of magical thing around the Beatles and their influence across a whole range of music. I mean, Elvis is undoubtedly huge, but I would go Beatles.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah.
And also Rolling Stones, but that's a different topic.
Right. You're a classic consultant. You can't just take an either or answer. You have to add your own interpretation and your own analysis.
No, I'll go with Beatles then. Yeah. Is
Okay.
there a vote there? Is there sort of a vote? What's the percentage of people voting for Beatles or Elvis? Is it?
Well, I'd be curious to hear from the audience, Beatles or Elvis, especially if you weren't on last week's episode. But last week when we asked the question, I'd say it was pretty mixed. I don't know that there was a clear favorite. I was trying to convince the audience that it was Beatles, but I wasn't very successful to those that were standing very strongly with Elvis. But Jacobus on LinkedIn made a comment here of, oh, here we go again, as did Kyler. So at least a couple of you were part of that debate last week. So if you were not, though, and you haven't had a chance to share your opinion, I'd love to hear it. Sam Graham from joining on LinkedIn says Elvis was one of the greatest country singers. So, which I agree with that. But I just think the songwriting of the Beatles, that's to me, that's the tipping of the scale is the songwriting and just the talent of the four of them combined. As opposed to obviously a very talented singer in Elvis.
Having said that, the Elvis '68 comeback tour where he was in those leathers and he was jamming and playing guitar was fantastic. It showed his musical ability, which I don't think many people thought he had. He had to prove it at that point. So yeah
exactly.
Very, very close.
Good. Well, we could spend the entire time talking about this whole debate, and we could spend the whole time, especially you and I, could spend the whole time talking about music because I know you're very much into music as well. So that's part of why I wanted to ask you that question. Make sure we get your opinion there, and curious to see the audience responses here too. But I guess just to start here with this topic of supply chain automation and digital transformation and some of the best practices. And again, this is a very broad topic, and you and I talked about this before we went live here today. What a broad topic this is. There's so much we could cover, but we'll try to target the conversation a little bit and do sort of a flyover view here. And certainly any questions the audience has, we'd love to hear that as well. But the first question I've got for you, Dominic, is what are the biggest changes you've seen in supply chain management and automation in recent years, more specifically since COVID?
Well, that's probably the key word there. It is a wide topic, and things have been improving for years with supply chain. But during the pandemic, we saw a shift of people's, what people were doing and companies were doing and how they're using technology. So for me, I think it was really around the confidence in the supply chain. So people were moving from we had a couple of clients that went from a low stock model to a high stock model, and had to sort of buy more space and their capacity planning, etc. was all different, and then trying to sort of wean themselves off that now. So that's kind of, I guess it's a blip in the roadmap of supply chain over the last 20, 30, 40 years, but it certainly sort of made a dent. So I think really where you're now looking at the digitization of all these different areas, with obviously this back office that's been digital for a while, but you've got now the front office, things around digital stores, Salesforce do good digital storefronts, and you've got the Shopify, etc., and Amazon fulfillment, etc. All those things are starting to tie up, and it's kind of made a difference to the supply chain model over the last few years. But I think some of the areas I've seen people struggle with is this really end-to-end. There's been a bit of a disconnect. So you get some companies that have a very complex demand planning and forecasting model where it's based on data and it's really accurate, and then they have planned orders, planned purchase orders, distribution orders, make to orders, and all that sort of drips through nicely. You have to make changes as you go to accommodate your demand planning. And others that have really done it where they just do a almost like a revenue driven buy plan. What do we want to make? We want to make an extra 5 million this month. All right, here's what we need to buy for that. And they're just sort of buying it and trying to sell it. And I think that sort of disconnect. So then sometimes the factory doesn't see what the demand plan is across different product types, what raw materials they need. It's that sort of disconnect sometimes when it's all linked. And then it gets to the factory and then the warehouse and transport. So I think that's where the market is going, to try and automate all these. And really with this digital footprints, we should be seeing a lot more of that. But the clients we've been working with across the board haven't quite got that sorted out yet. And that's kind of one of the trends, I think, for supply chain. So
this trend that you mentioned about stockpiling, for lack of a better word, stockpiling excess or extra inventory, is that happening primarily because of the shortages that have been experienced throughout the supply chain? It's a way to mitigate that risk or hedge against that risk, or is it because organizations themselves don't have good visibility into what the supply chain needs are, and so their response to that is just to stockpile inventory? Or is it some combination of both or something different?
It's both. If you haven't got good visibility of what your demand is and what your supplier's capacity to meet that demand, and how you put that whole together, and you're available to promise, you're capable to promise, a lot of companies aren't doing that. I think the pandemic showed up some of those fragilities in the supply chain anyway, and where the software, some of the investment in software, a lot of people are still running old legacy systems. We're still getting people who are on old systems that haven't updated, and they're doing it as and when they need to. But they've got away with it for years. Maybe they've got a good model around, they've got some manual processes, they managed to do it and it seems to work and they're making money. So why change it? And I think the pandemic forced people to change. And there was, where the system was creaking, the pandemic just magnified it, and you either collapsed or you changed to support that. And of course, the pandemic made people think, okay, the work from home, the technology, we need to sort of upgrade. And I think that started this whole, it's been on the cards for years, but this revolution of right, we need to get technology. Technology is really good, around AI and blockchain and all these other facilities that we've got. And I think people are starting to see that they do have to move towards that. And the cloud, I know the cloud's sort of good and bad, and we've discussed it, and you've got various YouTube videos around that, whether the cloud is good or bad. But the technology is there to improve these areas. So I think, yes, partly people's reluctance to do it and relying on manual processes and visibility, but the pandemic definitely added to that.
Interesting. Yeah. It seems to be the case. And do you see that with the clients we're working with now, both in Europe and elsewhere throughout the world? Do you see that dynamic shifting, or do you see things settling down as far as a more predictable, a more stable supply chain? Or are our clients still seeing significant disruptions and things like that?
It's definitely getting better, but people are now worried that it might happen again, or they don't want to run out of stock, or so those models have changed, and they're not changing back completely. So I think people have learned a lot, and it depends on whether you rely on Far East and China to bring all your goods in, or whether it's part of your where you've got to align that with more local supplied products, which have to be assembled or manufactured. So it obviously depends on the nature of the business. Some people have fairly simple supply chains, which are quite robust. Others have very complex ones, as across food and beverage, FMCG, if it's fast moving, or you're making things that rely on parts that come from all different areas of the world. It's obviously much more complex. So, and that's where technology, is trying to help, but people need to get out of their silos, really. I think the other issue is people working in silos where certain areas, sales team or merchandise team do it this way. Your factory does it that way. Your warehouse. I mean, warehouse and transport are probably a topic we need to talk about a bit today. And how they operate together. They're so close together, but most of the time they've got a separate system. Transport and warehouse are disconnected quite a lot. So that's sort of got to change really, in my view. And people are starting to move towards a better model for sure.
Right.
But getting away from what you used to do. We've done it this way for years, so we're going to carry on doing it. I've got a guy called Pete, and he's done this for years. Why change it now? And I think people are seeing that they've got to move, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a lot of these global supply chains were built or established in the 90s or earlier, and you think about the 90s and early 2000s, and as the global supply chain sort of came into maturity, and for a certain amount of time, it was very predictable. It was a predictable supply chain. You could get by with just having one supplier of a critical component, and there weren't any major disruptions in many cases. But then the pandemic certainly did expose that global supply chain model, to geopolitical or health pandemic related issues. There's just a lot of things that in the world right now that are apt to disrupt a supply chain. You mentioned the pandemic. There's, war in Ukraine, war in other parts of the world that can disrupt a supply chain. So I think there's just a lot of things. There's a lot more sensitivity and awareness, I think, that needs to happen when it comes to supply chain management.
Yeah, I agree. And it's trying to keep your costs low. Looking back to the old MRP2 days where it was infinite capacity, people just bought loads of stock, made loads of stock, and stored inventory. And going back to when my manufacturing solutions started, that was the opposite of that. Trying to say, okay, you need to work just in time, and looking at the theory of constraints, and balancing the flow and capacity rather than just trying to have loads of stock. So that's I think people are going back to that, just stocking up too much now, and that adds cost across inventory and inefficiencies, and quite often if you've got loads of stock, you think you can deliver quicker, and that's not always the case. If you're moving stuff around, you got to make sure all these warehouses or extra facilities that you buy are in your ATP. So I think people have sort of shifted one way, and I've got to get back to kind of using technology to smooth out those issues. But yeah, it's a massive topic. I don't know what the audience thinks, whether people are responding or anyone's got any sort of real life day-to-day issues that they've got. I know you're going to come to that anyway, but it's a very interesting topic, very wide and very difficult to get right for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding that balance between cost optimization, which has historically been a top priority for supply chain management. Now it's sort of shifting. Not that cost isn't important, but now it seems like the pendulum is swinging towards, let's make sure we have stock and available, that we can meet available to promise dates, and we can satisfy demand faster. And in those cases, it may be worth having higher inventory costs if it means that you can supply, better service and increase revenue. For
it is, but it's got to be connected. So if your data is disparate and one department's doing one thing and another one's doing another, that data is not always shared. So or not fed into planned orders and things like that. So teams interpret things in different ways. And if it's not a true demand forecast, for instance, you might have to buy more stock, but that creates space issues. Capacity might not be able to be found fast enough, and the rapid changes to the model. And so it's that visibility and planning. It's all about planning, really. Sometimes people don't plan enough, and they kind of react. But that visibility and confidence in your supply network, is key.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how you ship your order book. Again, you've got orders coming in, but sometimes you've stocked up, you've got new orders. Your order book is an issue. You can't always fulfill quicker just because you've got loads of stock. You've got to still find it, haven't you?
Right.
Or it's been used. Inventory allocations and how you do all that sort of stuff as well. Are really the complexities we've seen in the last couple of years. People struggle to get right, even though they've been doing it for years. How you allocate stock to orders and priorities and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed with that.
And some ERPs do it well, others don't. So it's it depends how complex it is. I've seen people use systems that probably aren't built for that sort of stuff to do really complex ATP modeling. Again, that's part of the work we do, isn't it? Trying to get the right ERP system to the right clients based on your complexity models.
Right. And redefine those processes and parameters and the way you run your supply chain, obviously, which extends not only to the technology, but also just your general business practices and processes and the way you're structured organizationally. All that stuff is impacted by how you run your supply chain for sure.
Exactly.
Now, looking to the audience here, just want to acknowledge and thank everyone for joining and mentioning where they're joining from today. Jacobus is joining from Netherlands, Prod from Cleveland, Ohio, Twana from Sweden. We have someone from Norway, Sam Graham from Spain, Aguiman from Senegal, Ryan from Denver, Colorado, Mayela from Brussels, Ezeldine from UK, Milad from Kansas City, Daniel from Hamburg, Germany, Usman from Qatar, Marco from Netherlands, Switzerland, Netherlands, Czech Republic, UA, Switzerland. Lots of European attendance here today, which is great because you're there in Europe, and we have a good team there in Europe as well. Just coming back, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but Sam mentions that Elvis was one of the great country singers. Mayela mentions the Beatles. And Kyler has a good comment here, asking a Brit if he likes the Beatles is like asking a German if they like David Hasselhoff, which is pretty funny. David Hasselhoff's an American, but yet he's huge in Germany, apparently still, from what I understand.
He helped bring down the Berlin Wall, I remember, but also he thinks, yeah.
That's right.
There, didn't he?
That's right. That's true. Then we also have Alice from Slovenia as well. So thank you everyone for joining throughout the world here today. Appreciate you joining, especially late in the day for many of you. Here's a question from Sam in Spain on LinkedIn. This is a great question that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, Dominic. And that is, accounting departments got computerized first because they're quite rules driven. Will AI be introduced there before the supply chain for the same reason? So, maybe talk about AI, just maturity of solutions. Maybe that's a broader way to look at it. When we look at the maturity of solutions and the technology available for accounting and back office departments, as you talked about before, versus supply chain management, do you see, how do you see that unfolding?
I think the maturity of supply chain, sure, it started with finance, donkeys years ago. But I think the manufacturing supply chain solutions out there are pretty robust. They're evolving as they go into the cloud. It's sort of, you look at the Oracle offering, it's possibly not as robust in the cloud as it was in on-premise. And I think a lot of them are going through that same issue. But yeah, I think the supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, warehousing tools are pretty good. It's just the uptake and people not really keeping up to date and using some of the new technology. You mentioned AI. AI is a difficult one. Most of the ERPs have got some sort of AI in them now, which seems to be helping. Although, I haven't really got much first-hand experience of how well that sort of helps in terms of, people's day-to-day jobs and helping with the automation, but it's supposed to help a little bit more with, the mundane tasks and automation. I think one of the more significant areas is possibly, some of the blockchain areas where, we've been working with a shipping company, and not that they're using it yet, but we were looking at similar ones, and there's areas around, same with transport or shipping, where you've got to have lots of documentation in each port and inventory and stuff like that of the products and where they've come from, etc. And things like blockchain have good areas around bill of lading and things like that, where it just knows, it automates it across this distributed ledger. Things like that, blockchain are probably, for me, a little bit more useful than AI at the moment. But again, I'm sure the audience will correct me on some of the RPA stuff. I know it's a big industry, but yeah, certainly blockchain, bill of lading. There's lots of tools around that which are we're starting to recommend now. In addition to ERP, ERP is just one part of it, isn't it? You've got to have, whether you've got Azure and your Power BI layers, how it works with AI and blockchain, metaverse. I guess metaverse. I don't know enough about metaverse, but I know you've done a few things on that as well. All these areas and layers of technology are really starting to come together now to support ERP.
Yeah. What about like ChatGPT? That component of AI. Do you see that becoming materially integrated into supply chains in the future, as far as just being able to use ChatGPT or some AI chatbot model to be able to just more easily access statuses of where inventory is or what the inventory situation is in different situations? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I do think it will become part of our everyday lives, with people. We do it now, don't we, with Siri and things like that, or, it's not quite the same AI, but it's still that sort of process. So yeah, I think it
Right.
will. People will start asking it questions, or even things like, I need a spreadsheet to load this. Can you help? And it will do things like that. So I think that will be useful. Whether it takes over and one day you won't need ERP, you just say, "Hey, ChatGPT, can you do my accounting this month? Here's my figures," and maybe it'll just go and do it. So maybe ERP's days are numbered. I really don't know where it's going to go. Hopefully I'll be retired by then, or I'll just, have the benefits of AI where I don't have to do slides anymore. That'd be a nice one. So I think it is. I think it is here to stay. I think if it becomes an enhancement and augments our experience and helps do some of the mundane stuff, but humans are still there to sort of guide and do the bigger strategic areas, then I think it's great. But yeah, I think I do see it appearing in every app pretty much to help and support people.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a comment from Prod on LinkedIn. Prod says RPA robotics and ALML are already pretty dominant in supply chain and warehouse management. I think it's probably fair to say that RPA robotics and machine learning, AI, all that stuff is going to become dominant or relevant in many functions, if not all functions within a business. It's just a matter of how quickly we get there and how exactly it unfolds and how we use that technology. Now, you mentioned a couple times in passing, Dom, you mentioned ERP systems, and I wanted to lead into this question from Kyler on LinkedIn, who says, what are your thoughts of best of breed solutions like Blue Yonder and Manhattan Associates? When does your organization need to consider a more specialized solution? So in other words, if you're not familiar, for those in the audience that aren't familiar with Blue Yonder, Manhattan Associates, those are supply chain management focused solutions. They specialize in providing pretty deep and robust supply chain management functions, but they're not as broad as an ERP system. And there's obviously a trade-off there as far as having one system that can do everything across an enterprise versus a more specialized solution. So when would you see, what do you see as sort of the trade-offs or the more likely scenario that an organization is going to need a specialized supply chain solution versus a broader ERP solution? How do we help our clients navigate that decision process?
Yeah, I mean, it's based on needs. So there's, having a one size fits all ERP, it depends on the nature of your business. Some systems fit that well, don't they? And others, we've gone in thinking there is a unified platform or something that can do everything. And then once you find out, and this is the whole point, you've got to go through the process. You got to look at what your strategic aims are. What you're doing now, what you're going to do in 10 years, how you're going to achieve that business plan, and how's technology going to underpin it. And you might find that your key processes around intercompany, or something asset management, and you don't really need the complexity of other systems. So you can end up breaking it down. So I think some of these systems like Blue Yonder are very good at what they do. So I think best of breed is probably coming back. It used to be, I've worked on some systems where we had a massive footprint, 25 applications all connected and doing lovely things. Then it went back to sort of, let's have a unified platform. Can we stick it all in one? And I think we're going back now to saying, well, we don't need a fully massive ERP. Let's look at how specific areas, especially if you've got some niche around supply chain or certainly manufacturing. Some of the manufacturing clients we've had recently have got some specific areas around recipe management, or they do clever stuff here and here, and that's where they need a specific system. So we certainly wouldn't advise on one size fits all ERP, but the way we help is to do the right due diligence. You have to go in, work out what your differentiation processes are. Most people do P2P and finance well, but straight through supply chain can be quite easy. But there's the nuances. What's your areas of real pain points? And once you understand the pain points, you can then start to work out what the best systems are to help with that. Maybe there is one system that does it all based on your supply model and your manufacturing capability. So that's kind of where we would go. There's no one answer to any of these. Blue Yonder is a very good product. I've been involved with it a few times, not for a while, but So we would certainly advocate doing a deep study on across all your business units to find out what your needs are.
Yeah.
And that's not rocket science. That's people think they can get round those sort of processes. Let's just pick one and go with it. You really need to do the due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think best of breed is a more viable option now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. In years past, you had to have a pretty sophisticated IT group
Yes.
to integration was complex, and it certainly still is. I mean, you still have to deal with integration and architecture and things like that. They're more important and even more of a success factor when you've got a best of breed solution or a specialized solution that you're trying to integrate with other systems, but it's not as difficult as it was in the past, with more of the open architectures and the low code, no code options and the focus on architecture, things like that. It gives you more options. You could go with a single ERP system that's fully integrated across supply chain management plus finance plus CRM plus HR and all the other stuff. Or, you also have the option to find a supply chain management focused solution. And I think a lot of it depends on if you're a very supply chain intensive organization, then you might lead with supply chain management. That might become your number one priority, that then the other things just sort of fall into place behind that. Or if supply chain isn't as relevant, it's important, but not as relevant as a supply chain intensive organization, it might be that an integrated ERP system might be the place to start, because whatever capability that's out of the box in an ERP system might be good enough to handle your supply chain. But if supply chain management is your competitive advantage and you need a ton of flexibility and robustness and all that stuff, you might be better off with that more specialized solution for sure.
Yeah. I think, coming back to that question, I guess Blue Yonder, one of the areas we have seen a lot more people taking areas is around, the warehouse management, WMS and transport management systems. So, it depends doesn't matter what ERP you've got. A lot of people are using, the Blue Yonders, and, we're working one that's now called E2Open for transport. And, companies are looking at having those as separate systems outside of their ERP. And there is a sort of an argument around, why would you have a separate WMS and TMS system? Surely they should be integrated, but a lot of companies have got those separate. So we're trying to sort of say, yes, it would make sense to have a conversion or some sort of combined model around WMS and TMS, but everyone's slightly different.
Right.
So that's probably a topic to talk about. Yeah, that's kind of an area we've worked on quite a lot recently. I don't know if that helps with, was it Kyler's question?
Yeah, it was Kyler that asked that question. And I think that you bring up a good point, though, which is, she was asking the question in the context of supply chain management focused solutions. But one thing you just alluded to is the fact that you could go a step further, and there's transportation management focused solutions. There's warehouse management focused solutions. There's procurement solutions like Ariba and others like that. So there's a lot of different options you have. I mean, you can go super deep and specialized into some of the aspects of supply chain. You could have a solution that's more broadly focused on supply chain management, or you could have, I guess, a third option is the broader integrated ERP system that covers supply chain management plus all the other stuff. Yeah. And then, of course, there's hybrid models as well, where you can mix and match or combine those three options.
Yeah, because the ERP does that quite well, where it's saying, okay, demand planning, inventory management, procurement, manufacturing, all those sort of things. I think they do well. Where you start to get to people having nuanced systems is when they farm it out. You've got your warehouse saying, how do you store those products? How do you ship them? Your inbound and outbound strategies, all that sort of stuff. And that's where we're probably starting to see more of convergence around maybe not having them separate. Some people have a completely separate warehouse system outside, or they use third-party, 3PLs, etc. So I think that's a big area. Certainly where AI and blockchain and things like that can help. But there's lots of systems that provide those. Just a transport management system or warehouse and transport.
Right.
Yeah, it's a big area. I don't know what experience people have in the audience with that. ERP is so wide, isn't it? It really is. But I think it does do supply chain quite well overall.
Yeah, especially when you get into manufacturing and planning, things like that. I mean, that's sort of what it was built for back in the 80s in the early years. Yeah. Here's a comment. I apologize, I can't see on my stream here who said this, but someone on LinkedIn had the comment of, we have integrated ChatGPT with ERP Next, engineered some prompts. It can create masters and transactions based on your textual inputs. So I guess the future is already here. So I think, ChatGPT can be a sort of a nice add-on or an integration point to give you better access or easier access to some of the transactions and data and information out of the system. But I'm curious to hear from the audience if you're seeing any usage like that within your organizations. Are you seeing ChatGPT or AI or anything like that being integrated in your supply chain management? And also to Dominic's point and Kyler's question, what do you see the future being? Do you see integrated ERP being able to handle supply chain management needs, or do you think it's more of a a specialized supply chain solution that's going to provide the best answer for your organization. I'd love to hear the audience comments here below. But when we look at supply chain transformations, when we're looking at automating a supply chain and going through a digital transformation within supply chain management, Dominic, what are some of the biggest challenges with those transformations that you see with our clients in Europe and other parts of the world?
Well, I suppose it comes down to organizational change, doesn't it, really? Probably still the key area of failure. People changes. So, and I think trying to get people to stop. So a lot of the companies we still still have manual processes. There's spreadsheets everywhere. They were saying, okay, as I said before, demand planning. A lot of people do it in a spreadsheet. Maybe it's partly on the system, but they download it. Inventory management. Some people do it on a spreadsheet. Warehouse management. A lot of that stuff is still very manual, even though they might have systems that do it. They tie it together with spreadsheets, and people like to work in a certain fashion. So I think it's really the people changes when you introduce new technology and say we're going to get rid of all these external data stores. And some people have hundreds of them. And trying to get people to change their way of working, stop using Excel. But then people get worried about their jobs and etc. How are they going to fare in a modern world that's got blockchain and AI? What am I going to do? I do this all day, every day. So I think that's still the biggest area. It's the people change, organizational change management that really rocks everything or brings everything to a halt. And that's where you get your biggest lack of ROI, where you don't change properly. So I think with any digital transformation, whether it's supply chain, finance, or whatever, it's the organizational change management is still one of the key areas we're finding people don't get right and don't plan for.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that, but to that point, because I have a follow-on question there. But
okay.
I want to get to this question too, which is relevant to what you just said, Dominic. And this is from Alice on LinkedIn. And Alice says AI will recommend the best supplier in the supply chain in terms of cost effectiveness and sustainability performance. And the reason I bring up this comment is because it ties into your comment you just made, Dominic, about the people impact. And we have technology. Clearly, we have technology that can enable this sort of capability that Alice mentions, and some of the capabilities that you've mentioned, Dominic, around ChatGPT and AI and RPA and just supply chain management solutions in general. You've got these great technologies that can do a lot with your supply chain, but ultimately it's your people that have to adapt to this new way of thinking and different ways of thinking. Even in Alice's example here of finding the best supplier based on cost effectiveness and sustainability performance, that might be a different approach. That might be a change for you as an organization. It might be a different set of priorities than you've had in the past. And the technology certainly can provide you the tool set to do it, but you need your people to understand and be aligned with that approach and that strategy and that operational model going forward. It seems so. I think that's a good example to sort of unpack what you just said there, Dominic. What about this question? Just as I think we're sort of coming back to metrics here and what the focus of supply chains are and should be and will be in the future. And this is from Sam on LinkedIn. And Sam says, what about quality and delivery reliability? Are those metrics that are still important? Are they becoming more or less important given this post-pandemic world we're in when we look at quality and reliability?
Well, yeah, they sometimes fall out the window, don't they? If you're focusing on one area and quality goes out the window, but the delivery reliability, and again, I think it comes back down to the tail end of the supply chain when you're looking at warehousing and delivery. Quality's I think quality is probably handled well in the ERP, but certainly transport and warehouse management is a big area we probably ought to discuss. So, does the warehouse operation run with your distribution centers? Are the logistic processes aligned? Do you have trucks that are sitting there waiting or getting the deliveries that aren't packed correctly? Do customers have to pack them or unpack them or reorder things at the other end? So, to that point, delivery reliability, that is a massive issue, I think, around WMS and transport management systems that hasn't been fully addressed in a lot of organizations. Does the customer miss out? Quite often, yes, they do. So, I mean, for warehouse systems, what's the point of a warehouse system? It's better control of inventory, lower material handling costs, lower stock held, so it helps manage that. But unless it's integrated with the transport management system where you're freight costs and your route planning, where you go off, and come back, and those sort of costs escalate, and the delivery times, delivery tracking, that's where a lot of customers aren't happy. They're not getting the right deliveries at the right time. So I think it's a good question. It's probably another session topic on its own.
Yeah.
So having that cross-department visibility, of warehouse to transport, it certainly helps. And inventory allocation, I think we mentioned that before as well. So waiting times, demurrage, different ways to pronounce that, and the fines for missed delivery and waiting times. It's a huge area. We've got firms that have got massive weekly demurrage charges because they haven't worked that out. They tend to just live with it as part of their budgeting. Yeah, trucks wait, trucks get misdelivered. So I think
cost of doing business.
Yeah, cost of doing business. Yeah, but there are some huge savings to be had around that sort of area about improved, warehouse to transport connectivity.
Right.
Scheduling, vehicle scheduling, and depends how many trucks you've got and whether you've got your own fleet or whether you used outsource that or a combination. So yeah, it's a massive area for sure. But that's where I think AI and all this blockchain technology is starting to help. I'm sure people online have got some great experiences around how that's, people can read the number plates of a truck coming in, and they've already got their, dock assigned. They've also got the pallets ready. So it can help if used properly, for sure. But we're finding customers are struggling around those areas for sure.
Right. Yeah. And then here's a comment from Prod on LinkedIn, and Prod says data governance plays a huge role in digital transformation. Governing data and approval processes for machine learning and AI recommended options and data will be interesting. I feel like we still need manual eyes to review it. And I think this is a really good point back to your comment about change management, Dominic, about the impact of the people and just keeping on this thread here of the human side of supply chain automation and transformation. Even with AI and ChatGPT and RPA and some of these different models that are meant to automate and replace what humans have historically done to help manage supply chains, there's still that human element that needs to be involved, at least as it stands today. But that's a pretty significant shift to people's mindsets, and it still doesn't change the fact that people are afraid, in some cases, of these technologies. They're afraid of the impact it has on their job. They're afraid of their perceived lack of value, in terms of me as a human that has thrived on, sort of heroics and being the person that can go out there and find the information despite the fact that I don't have the right tools and it's super difficult to do. Now, all of a sudden, the tool sets are there. It's automated. That part of my job and those heroics that go away, that's going to create a threat to me, even if it's the best thing for the organization and the best thing for my customers. For me as an employee, that can be a threat. So, I think as we look to some of these emerging technologies, it seems as though change management is going to become a bigger and bigger issue over time. But maybe we could just build on that a little bit and talk more specifically about change management. What do you see as the biggest change management obstacles and challenges when it comes to transforming or changing or automating a supply chain or going through any sort of digital transformation for that matter?
Well, I think you touched on some of the areas there in terms of the expectation, around how technology is going to shape the future and jeopardize people's jobs. And I think, people are worried. And so I think the biggest thing that I think companies can do, which they don't do, is build that sort of, is the expectation saying, okay, some of them pretend jobs won't change. Don't worry, it's all going to be fine. And rather than saying, look, we'll build a support environment for people whose jobs may be at risk, excite them about the future. There's new roles coming. Yes, some jobs may change, some jobs may go, but we're going to create this whole new world where there's different roles, and get them excited about change, to embrace the change and manage those expectations. So in your teams, you've got to manage your direct reports to sort of say, well, what are your skills, where do you want to go, and it should be part of that sort of career progression. And I think people don't do that. Managers and companies don't seem to embrace change. We've worked with a few that have said, don't mention the word transformation even. No. We're not changing the way we do. Well, yes, you are. You might not be changing your operating model, but you're not changing your business model. But you're going to change your operating model. But people are scared of the word transformation. We've seen it 2 or 3 times recently. No, don't mention that. And I think that's a key misgiving, where it should be, look, we're going to transform. And this is where the strategic view, if you've done the strategy right, and there's a very well articulated business goal and strategy that comes from the top down, it's communicated well. People can see where the direction of the company is going. You need new tools to be able to get to that direction. And I think people can see that journey and they jump on the bus. If you hide things from them, don't do the strategic planning properly, then I think you're on a road to nowhere. And it doesn't matter how well your transformation goes. If you don't use it or people aren't bought in, you become derailed. And it's a classic thing that hasn't changed for years. So I think there is an opportunity for people to just communicate better, the communication channels, and you can't hide things so much anymore. So why not use the communication channels that we've got and to communicate that vision from top down and pass it through the ranks and get people excited about change or a new world. I mean, maybe some people like to, well, I do the spreadsheet all day, every day, and I like to do it. Well, maybe they aren't the right people for your company. I hate to say that if that's what someone does, but if that's all you want to do, you might worry about it. But you say, well, actually, I don't need to do that 4 hours a day. Great, I could do something else. That's really the mentality you want. And perhaps, we can change people's thoughts around that. But it comes from the top down. It needs to be a decent vision that's well articulated. And that will solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and it's that the vision and taking the time to provide clarity to individuals within the organization and to the broader organization, just in terms of what people's jobs are going to look like in the future. I think when you leave it to chance, or you sort of leave it open-ended that, hey, Dominic, I'm gonna give you this tool set that's going to make your job so much easier. It's going to automate 80% of what you do. Your first knee-jerk reaction might be, well, that sounds really cool. But then the more you think about it, the more you're going to think, well, wait a minute, what am I going to do with the 80% of my job that you're automating? Does that mean my job's going away, or what am I supposed to do with that 80%? If I don't have answers to that question, I'm human, and my mind's probably going to take me to a dark place that assumes the worst. If someone doesn't provide the clarity of, here's what your job's going to look like, Dominic. Yes, we're going to automate 80% of your job. That spreadsheet's going away. But guess what you're going to do now? You're going to be, doing more strategic stuff, using these reports or making these decisions. And, you're almost elevating people in their roles in many ways and taking away some of the manual work. And to your point, some people are going to always love that manual work. Maybe that's what they take pride in, and they won't always be able to make that transition, but you have to at least try to do that as an organization. And most organizations don't naturally or intuitively know that they need to define what that future state organization is going to look like, so that people have that clarity.
Yeah, and to be honest, you won't know that on day one. This is why, if you have a vision and it's well documented and well communicated, people go, oh, great, well, what does that mean? And then you have to start, the journey. You won't know what those roles look like. But you can start to do some of the groundwork. And I think in supply chain, that whole supply chain world probably is a bit more sensitive to it, because some of the roles you've got people in the factory who are packing, people in the warehouse who are doing put away and climbing up ladders, and some of those things go because AI and all that machine learning helps all that sort of automated putaways, and maybe not so much packing, but you've got machines for packing and labeling, and so some of those jobs will be at threat. Now, what do you say? Okay, well, 50% of your day was doing that. Now you can do something else. I mean, there probably is a different role for that person, but that's just a journey. You have to you can't know all at once. You have to take them on a journey. Create the environment, create the sort of support environment where people can find out what sort of roles there are there. Maybe they want to apply for a different job, or what would you want to do? Some roles will go, and that's just unfortunate. So I think certainly in supply chain, warehouse, manufacturing, it probably is a bit more sensitive because of those sort of low-level roles you can get. But I think management have to just take that on board. It's probably better than thinking your job's safe, and then at the end of the day, you're told you're one of 50 people that are out the door, with no chance to sort of think about it, maybe embrace technology, apply for different jobs. And so, it's a very difficult world,
Right.
Not very nice to lose your job, but the way technology is going, we're probably all going to be out of a job at some point. We're all going to have to change anyway. Probably everyone on this call will have to do something different in 3 years' time.
Right.
Just because you're in a factory, okay, you might have so many options, but you have to adapt. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the business.
Yeah. There's some schools of thought that suggest that the more we automate people's jobs and the more we introduce technology into people's jobs, the more that the average IQ of the average labor force participant is going to have to increase. So in other words, you're going to have smarter people, and people's IQ is going to have to either come up, or the economy is going to be more dependent on people with higher IQs because of the use of technology. So it's sort of like you have to be able to adapt to that. And we as organizations and leaders, though, have to ensure that we're providing the tools and the leadership and the guidance to help the labor forces in our respective organizations to get there. What about? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I think so, but it should help you make better decisions, quicker decisions. So the person who's doing the put away, okay, they're not doing it anymore, but they might be able to spot issues or process the data in a different way and add value. It's all about adding more value to the business rather than just doing something that's mundane that a machine could do. So I think it's overall a good thing if we manage it properly. The problem with AI and the way technology is and society in general is the changes are too fast. Today it's like this, tomorrow it's like that. We don't have time to adapt. And I think that's where humans on the whole are going to fall down, where we try to change, society changes, what our values are and what we think is good and bad. It changes almost daily. And technology is the same. It's probably moving ahead too fast, or it might do, where people can't adapt. So that's probably the area I see an issue where we play catch up as humans.
Right.
Whilst the machines are catching up with us. At one point they'll be probably as smart as us, but there's certain things they won't have the ability to do, I hope, which is why human intervention will still be needed.
Yeah. And if you think about it, this is a fear that's been around for decades. When robotics first started gaining prominence in the 80s, there's the fear that robots were going to take over our jobs. And, that was 40 years ago, and robots have taken over some jobs, but there's still plenty of manufacturing jobs and shop floor workers and people that need to operate the machines and the robots and all that stuff. It's just that their jobs look a lot different now. They're not doing as much manual labor as they did 40 years ago. So they've, the role of a shop floor worker has just changed in 40 years. And that's probably going to be the case for a lot of people, most of us, if not all of us, in the coming decades. So I think it's more a matter of how do we change, not so much are we going to become obsolete. If we don't change, we'll become obsolete. But I think it's more the risk is that we just don't adapt to the change along the way.
I think so.
When we think about, so we've talked a lot about change management, and it's hard to talk about change management without talking about business process improvement and business process management. So I want to get to this question here from Aguman on LinkedIn. And Aguman says, according to business process management and supply chain management, do you think that companies who adopted software without BPM could succeed? So in other words, if we just simply install new technologies and automate our supply chains, is that enough? Will we be successful, or do we need to go through a broader business process management or business processes initiative, improvement initiative to be able to really leverage that value? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. Processes will change for sure from legacy systems to new, and I think that's probably where some of the problems have been, where people try to over-engineer the ERPs to almost mimic legacy processes. You really want to say, get rid of that, start anew. It won't be wholesale change, unless you do, your processes are terrible and all manual. But yeah, so you have to do that. And the process re-engineering, I was a process guy years ago, and it's very difficult where you've got a system, people do training, you've got a process map that you've done in Visio, stick it on the wall. It's that process embedding that is difficult. But there are tools that, help with that. I think someone mentioned Signavio, I think I saw in the chat, and I've worked with that a couple of times, things like that, where you've got that process management that goes into a database and it starts to give you proper insights. It's not just a picture on a wall. There's guided learning tools, even BPMN, things like that, all that sort of notation where it's database driven are good, because embedding process is the hardest thing. You do your training, you got a new process, people seem to understand it, but then when you go live, those processes and thoughts need to be embedded. So you need to have stuff on the fingertips in terms of processes and changes, guided learning at all times, and that's one of the hardest things to do. So yeah, those that's always the way. So I think it's the old classic critical success factors: top management support, change management, business process re-engineering. It's been the same probably since year dot. And I think I've written a couple of papers on it myself, and I know you're interested in that area as well. They are still the key areas. You got to change properly. You got to manage your processes or change your processes, and you got to have buy-in across the organization. Otherwise, things won't change. So, and I don't think it matters how much technology you get in. Those things, technology should be able to help all those areas. Maybe not the top management support, but the other areas. but they still are key success factors for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. For as much as technology has changed, there's a lot about digital transformation, supply chain automation that has not changed as far as what those critical success factors are and what you need to do to be successful in any sort of transformation. The good news is that hasn't really changed, but yet organizations still haven't figured out how to do those things well, unfortunately. So just to maybe wrap this all up and tie this all together, what advice do you typically give to organizations to help them get started on their supply chain automation and digital transformation initiatives? What are sort of those first steps that an organization can take to, figure out where they are in their current state and what they can do to get towards or start to take steps towards that future state of where they want to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for probably any sector, whether it's supply chain or across the board. It's you've got to take time, a little bit of time and planning. You've got to take time to understand your strategic needs. Plan a roadmap. Don't just leap into it. Do some good current state assessment, review pain points, because you'll find out areas that are sort of upstream and downstream. So you might have areas in warehouse or transport that actually affects your AP system, because they haven't got the data and they can't pay your freight invoices. And so, you really have to take time to see where the impact is upstream, downstream, and that you need a few months at least to sort of do a current state assessment, etc., and then set up correctly for success in a program. So you also need to do that. Once you've done that, you can choose your ERP carefully based on your specific needs and size. Don't just put in Oracle because someone says it's good or it looks good on your CV. You really need to put in the right systems. Is it in ERP? Do you go Blue Yonder or E2Open for different areas? Do you stick with what you got and just embellish it with better apps around it? There's no real shortcut. You have to choose your ERP carefully, do a decent assessment, feasibility study, if you like. There's no real shortcut to ERP success, and proper preparation must be undertaken. So I think that's always the case, and that's where we want to help people, and that's kind of the role we do. Organizations shouldn't begin any program without understanding those complexities and what skills you need in house. What the SIs and integrators won't do, and data migration, data management. So that strategy, what your transformation benefits are, all those need to be mapped out first. To enable the correct planning and budgeting, etc. So your business vision, your ERP strategy must align, and then you can leverage the power of ERP to make true business gains. Or what is the point otherwise? It has to make sense. It has to add benefit. Or why bother? Might as well stay doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Very much agree with you on that. And that's why, looking at the future state business processes, the future state organization, the future state technological roadmap, all that stuff, and taking the time up front to plan that out and to have a clear and concise plan on how you're going to do that all is so important. Yeah. Just a couple of closing comments here from the audience. These are really great comments, so I don't want to overlook them or wrap up without getting to them. Joanna on LinkedIn says that the new processes should be taught alongside the new button presses, getting learners into one iteration of training to understand how to operate effectively at Go Live. And that's a great point, that training can be a way to reinforce and to clarify what a new business process is going to look like. Not just how to push the buttons, not just how to do the stuff in the technology, but all the other stuff that we've talked about in this conversation around, if we're going to focus on environmental sustainability and choosing the right vendor or supplier, or if we're going to look at cost or quality, or we're going to shift the way that we manage our supply chain. Those are obviously process improvements that we also need to bake into the training that shows people how they're going to do their jobs within the technology as well.
Yeah, and that's why the business should sort of build the training packs based on maybe your UAT, because there's system processes, which I think we're defining, but there's also business processes. They're not necessarily the same thing. A business process contains system processes probably, and vice versa. So I think that's quite key. And some of these things around like Signavio and the guided learning you get shouldn't just be system processes, what to press. It's really how does that dovetail into an overall business process and other workflows and things like that. So yeah, it's a good point. And there are, guided learning, all those sort of things should help with that. Training is, I always find training, even when it's done well, unless you go live straight away, people forget and you have to keep retraining. So some of these tools and process tools and guided learning do help.
Right.
Good question.
Yep. Yeah. And there's, obviously, if you're in Europe, that's something that Dominic and I can help you with. If you're a European organization, or if you're in other parts of the world, we've got offices in North America as well as Asia Pacific. So depending on where in the world you are, that's something the Third Stage can help with. We're independent, technology agnostic, so that's a way to get more of an objective advisory support level in helping with your supply chain and digital transformation. And then we'll get this will be the last question we get to, just in the interest of time. It's from Sam Graham, and leave it to Sam to give us a really good closing question here. One last question: is it true that Elvis is still alive and working in a Third Stage office somewhere? I can't confirm or deny that. That's all I'll say to that right now. And John Lennon as well. We were talking about John Lennon before we went live here, and John Lennon might also be working at a Third Stage office somewhere, alive and well, of course.
They are, yeah.
They are for sure. Probably in Europe, probably in our UK office, right? That's probably where they would be. Well, good. Well, thank you for being here, Dominic. Really appreciate your time, and appreciate the audience. Great questions. There's a lot more we could cover here, and we do have a lot of resources on our website. I see some of the chats and links being shared on some of the chat streams here. So if you go to thirdstage-consulting.com and just search supply chain, digital transformation, any of those topics, you're going to find a ton of content related to that. You can also go to our YouTube channel, either my YouTube channel under Eric Kimberling, or Third Stage Consulting has a separate YouTube channel as well. If you search either of those for supply chain automation, supply chain management, you'll find a ton more content around this whole topic. So really appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. It's something that I love to talk about as well, just like you do, Dominic, and appreciate you being here, Dominic. So thanks very much.
Pleasure.
And
Thank you very much for inviting me. And thanks for the audience and all the questions. I haven't seen them all though, really. So through them afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, they'll stay here. Yeah. So they aren't going anywhere. So thank you for all the questions, and apologies we couldn't get to all of them, but a lot of great questions here. Again, this live stream is one we do every Tuesday, same time, same place. We stream to all the platforms we're on right now, which is LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. And this episode that will feature this interview, along with other content that we have yet to record, will become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that is released a week from tomorrow, on Wednesday of next week. You can find the complete episode that will feature this interview. So thank you for being part of the live production to everyone here today. So in the meantime, hope you all have a great week, and we hope to see you next time in the live stream. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, you.
Eric. Kyla, for mediating. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tom.